Diane Johnson. Met her last year. And her family's got a history of being involved in the organization from way, way back. And it's so interesting how it's come in and out and in and out, but it was enough to confuse this dear sister until she didn't know what the truth was anymore. So I'm really eager to hear what the Lord has done in this woman's life. Diane Johnson from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Diane, come up and tell us what the Lord has done in your life.
Well, first I want to say good morning to everyone. This would have been a great morning to sleep late. I was tempted. What I want to say is that I was born into a family of Jehovah's Witnesses, and my family was my life. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. We were a very close-knit family. And so I spent summers with my grandparents and with my aunts and uncles. I had loads of cousins. Every single person in my family was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Every Sunday we went to the Kingdom Hall. And then after Kingdom Hall on Sunday, then we went to my father's brother's house. He was also one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And he had 10 kids. And so it was always big fun to go over to their house. And so we just had a fairly happy family life. I felt nurtured when I grew up, and I felt loved and accepted until I decided that I wanted to leave the religion. My earliest memories were of knocking on doors. I mean, when your parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, when you are a kid, they take you with them. You don't get to stay home. So I was probably in the stroller knocking on people's doors and offering people the Watchtower and Awake. I remember standing on, stay over here? Oh, sorry. I remember standing on the corner with my parents and holding up the Watchtower and the Awake. We never were allowed to sleep late, ever. So that if you were a student, you would get up and you would go to school from Monday to Friday, and then on Saturday you would knock on people's doors, and then on Sunday you would knock on people's doors too, and then you would go to the Kingdom Hall. So as a kid, since I was in that religion, I never celebrated Christmas. I never had birthday party, or we didn't do Halloween, or Thanksgiving or Easter. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, the big thing was on Easter, everybody got a new outfit. And then you wore it to school on Monday. That's how everybody knew. Well, every Easter Monday, I went to school with the same stuff on that I had on previously because we never got a new outfit at Christmas. And of course, we never had any of the fun associated with any of those holidays. I wasn't allowed to salute the flag. I never even wanted to salute the flag because of what I had been taught as a young Jehovah's Witnesses. And when I was in school, what I remember, when I went to school, teachers could like beat and drag you and hit you with the yardstick and put you in the corner and things like that. And I remember one of my elementary school teachers, probably when I was in the first grade, in the morning when you came to school, the day started with the Good Morning to You song. You sang that to your teacher. Then they would read something from the Bible. We memorized the 23rd Psalm when I was in school. We memorized the 100th Psalm, and everybody would recite it in the morning. Then was the salute to the flag. And I remember I was the only one that wasn't saluting the flag among all these kids. And I have to clean my glasses because I ran over here in the rain, and I cannot see. And my teacher, as I was standing there, she would put my hand over my heart. So I would stand there, and she would put my hand, and I would take it down. And she would put it up, and I would take it down. And it became like a tug of war for the longest period of time until finally she realized that I was adamant about not saluting the flag and not singing the national anthem. And so I never did, during all the time that I was in school, either salute the flag or sing the national anthem. During all the time that I was in elementary school. They always had the Halloween parade. You wear your Halloween costume to school, and you bring snacks and things for the classroom party. Well, I was never allowed to have costume, of course, and there was always a big Halloween parade. And I was always the one kid in first grade, second grade, third grade that was marching around with my regular clothes on. I did eat the candy, though. Did not tell my parents. We never gave out candy when people knocked on our doors at Halloween time. We just didn't participate in that holiday at all. And I remember as a young kid knocking on people's doors on Christmas morning as a young kid because we didn't celebrate Christmas at all. And I remember people would open the door and you would see kids running around and presents, and that was when trees came in like pink. They came in different colors. And so people would have silver Christmas trees and pink Christmas trees. There were white Christmas trees. You could always look in people's houses and see all the wonderful things that were going on and all the wonderful smells and all would be wafting out. And we would be knocking on people's doors selling the Watchtower and the Awake. And that's how we spent every single Christmas holiday. It always looked like a lot of fun, and it always looked like something that I wanted to experience. And one of the things that I learned as I got older, as my people I knew and my friends began to show me how you celebrate Christmas, is how much enjoyment that brings to children's lives and how much fun it is to watch them on Christmas morning. And the whole point of Christmas certainly is not the gifts, but just being able to experience that was something that I had never done in my entire life. As a matter of fact, the first time I even hung an ornament on a tree, I was about 30 years old. And I didn't know how to hang the ornament on, so that you have to hang them a certain way. Everything I hung fell to the bottom of the tree. And it's like, well, how old are you? We never celebrated any birthdays. I don't know the birthdays of anybody in my family. I don't know my parents' birthday. I don't know my brothers and sisters' birthday. I don't know anybody's birthday because we never celebrated any birthdays. You're not allowed as a Jehovah Witness to have any friends that are not Jehovah's Witnesses, or at least that's the way it was then. If you were in school, of course, you could associate with the other students in school, but once school was over, that ended your relationship. They didn't come to your house, you did not go to their house. To this day, to some extent, it's hard for me to reach out to other people because when you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, friends just fall into your lap. Because the organization is so closed and because they're so tight-knit, whoever is around you is who your friend is. And that's the people that you tend to hang out with. And so as I was growing up, the people that I hung out with were in my family, and there were other people at the Kingdom Hall. My father was the congregation overseer. My grandfather was the congregation overseer. My grandfather was of the anointed. Other people in my family, all the men in my family pretty much held positions of responsibility in the Jehovah Witness religion. My great-grandparents on my mother's side were also Jehovah's Witnesses. Every single person that I knew and loved was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. All the women in my family, most of the women in my family didn't work. And so they were either full-time pioneers, or if they were raising young children, then they were vacation pioneers. That's what they used to call it then. And you have to keep track of every moment of your time. You have to fill out those, you used to have to fill out those little reports that show how many hours you make, and there was a target amount of hours. I think Pioneers was 100 hours a month, and if you were just a regular person, a publisher, I guess it used to be called, then you had X amount of hours that you were expected to fill every month, and you filled that out and turned that in. I don't know who was keeping track of that, but something was being done with that. I don't know if it was being sent up to New York or to Bethel or to wherever the case may be, but I know that they were keeping track of it. There were 3 kids in my family. I was the oldest, and I had a younger brother and I had a younger sister, and they continue in that religion until today. As I said before, we were all expected to knock on doors, and as we grew older, we were expected to have Bible studies with people, and we were to bring people into the Jehovah Witness religion. I don't even know how many hours I spent studying Jehovah Witness doctrine. and leading other people to believe in this doctrine. It never crossed my mind that the religion was false, ever. I knocked doors, as I said before, every Saturday, every Sunday, every holiday. I held Bible studies with people to try to bring them into the religion. I thought that anybody who wasn't interested was a goat. I participated in the ministry school. I answered questions on Tuesday night Bible study and on Sunday during the Watchtower study. The information they give is redundant, so that really you could answer a lot of those questions without even reading the information. But of course, you were expected to read it, and you were expected to come with stuff underlined in your personal and private copy of each and every book that they expected you to study and read. And my parents demanded this, so that after school, then there was Bible study and homework and attending all the thousands of meetings that Jehovah's Witnesses expect you to attend. I was a Jehovah Witness during 1975. And what I can remember is that there were predictions previous to that about Armageddon coming in 1975. Everybody was excited because at that time it seemed like the world was changing. It used to be a kinder, gentler place. And so I started to see more crime and just all the things that the Bible had foretold, wars and rumors of wars. There was the Vietnam War going on at that time. And so there was lots of expectations and anticipation about 1975, and we were expecting it, and we were excited about the fact that Armageddon was going to come, and we were going to have the opportunity to live on a paradise earth. And I remember being in a skit at the Circuit Assembly where we depicted life on Paradise Earth, because there were always skits at the Circuit Assembly. And I remember the one that I was in a lot because my father was frequently in charge of the Circuit Assembly, or my grandfather was, or my uncles were. There was always somebody in my family involved in the Circuit Assembly. And so I was in a lot of skits. I have lots of acting experience. And the one skit that I'm thinking of now, what I remember is we were all living in a paradise. It was wonderful. It was peaceful. Everybody was happy. And the one line I remember is, "Let that lion by." Because back in that time, I remember thinking, once you're in a paradise earth, of course, all the animals are going to be peaceful and they're all going to be vegetarian. They're not going to be eating us, so let the lion by. The other thing I remember about 1975 is that not only was it welcomed with great anticipation as the end of this wicked old system of things, as Jehovah's Witnesses always used to say, but it was an opportunity for a rebirth, for a perfect body, to live forever, to live under the reign of Christ, to not have any crime, to not have anybody that was hungry, to know that everybody that was around you loved you. And so we were really excited about that coming. And of course, it did not happen. Not only did it not happen, but shortly thereafter, people that were Jehovah's Witnesses began to deny that that prediction was ever made. What blew my mind was that I remember that prediction. And I talked to a couple people about it, and they insist that what the Watchtower said was that the end of 6,000 years of man's existence was coming in 1975, not Armageddon, not that it was the end of the old system of things. And whenever you talk to people or Jehovah's Witnesses, they adamantly deny this prediction. I remember going to the memorial and never, ever, ever seeing anybody take the bread and wine, ever. And I, of course, never crossed my mind to take the bread or wine because the wine or the bread, because I was of the earthly class. Therefore, you're not allowed to participate in that. The only people allowed to take that would be the anointed, the ones that were going to go to heaven. I never saw anybody partake, ever. They just pass it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then it's over. As I said before, my dad was an overseer, and my brothers and sisters and I, we were always expected to be the perfect example. We had to be the perfect children. We were the ones who were the example for everybody else in the congregation. I think this is too much pressure to put on a kid. The religion in and of itself is a tremendous amount of pressure because you, as a young kid, are different than every other kid that lives around you. You're not friends with them, you don't hang out with them, you don't celebrate any of the holidays, you don't participate in any of the things that kids in your neighborhood participate in, and so you live a somewhat isolated existence, which for me was fine because I had so many relatives that were a part of that religion. During high school, and even during junior high school, I never went to a football game, not a basketball game, not a pep rally, not a school dance, not one single after-school activity. Because it's school, home, Jehovah's Witness. That was our entire existence. My entire existence at school was very, very narrow, which is why now my kids always have participated in every single sport, every single after-school activity. They participate in anything because I want them to be able to experience what it is to be a young person. I can't remember the age that I was baptized, but what I do remember is that I was young, way before I was 18. Way before 18, probably somewhere around 12. And part of the reason for that is I was constantly pressured by my dad. Because he was the big muckety-muck at the Kingdom Hall, you know, it's like, how can my kid not get baptized? And so there was constant pressure. When are you going to get baptized? Are you going to get baptized? The circuit assembly is coming up. We're going to be going to New York to Yankee Stadium. You could get baptized there. Have you ever thought about it? Well, how come you're not going to dedicate your life to Jehovah? You believe in Jehovah's organization, don't you? It was a constant rant. It became a mantra. And so as a kid, I finally just gave in because I got sick of hearing it from him. And I decided that I would go ahead and get baptized, and I did so at a circuit assembly. He wore me down. I just wanted him to get off my back. And so I went ahead and I told him that I was going to get baptized, and I did. And at that time, you didn't have to jump through any hoops in order to get baptized. All you had to do was show up. After the fact, I think now you have to have a study and you have to answer questions and you have to do a lot of things. But for me, that wasn't the case. All you had to do was say, hey, I want to get baptized. And like, okay, come on. Because they kept track of every single person that got baptized. If I flash back to high school, one of the things that I remember is that when it came time to go on the prom, and I wanted to go on the prom, there was a boy that I liked in high school, and he was not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So the only way I could even go on the prom is if I went with one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Fortunately for me, there was a Jehovah's Witness boy in my high school, and he wanted to go with a girl that he liked, who was not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so we devised this very elaborate scheme. And essentially what happened, because prom, I think, is the same the world over. You go to the girl's parents' house, they take your photo, and then off to the prom you go. And that's what we did. He came to my house and picked me up. We took all these pictures and things as if he was my date for the prom. We went to a friend's house, my real prom date, whose name was Martio. My real prom date picked me up at my friend's house, and Tyrone, which is this guy's name, went to pick up his prom date. That was my first date outside of the Jehovah Witness religion. I never told my parents. The bottom line, though, is that after I got baptized, my dad was really happy with the commitment that I made, but this turned out to be a decision that I later on learned to regret. This turned out to be pivotal in my relationship with my family later on. This one youthful indiscretion opened the door for my entire family to shun me once I decided that I couldn't participate in the Jehovah Witness religion anymore. After graduating from high school, it never crossed my mind to go to college or to pursue an education or any kind of profession or anything, because everybody assumed, and so did I, that I was going to get a job and I would spend the rest of my life serving the Jehovah Witness organization and looking for a husband. That's the other thing. Back then, if you were a Jehovah Witness young lady or if you were a young man, the expectation was you would either live the single life and, serve Jehovah, serve Jehovah, serve Jehovah, or you would get married and serve Jehovah, serve Jehovah, serve Jehovah. And I knew that I did not want to live the single life. So I lived with my parents after I graduated high school, and I got a job as a clerk typist. That used to be a job title back in the 60s. I was a clerk typist at Girard Bank, which is a bank in Philadelphia which doesn't exist anymore. I was one of the few black people that were working at that bank. I was really smart when I was younger, and so not having had the opportunity to go to college was a missed opportunity, because who knows what things could have happened as a result of getting additional education. Anyway, it was in the late 60s when I ended up starting that job, and this was at a time when the work world was different. Women couldn't wear pants to work. Women had to have a break every 5 hours. There was a ladies' lounge so that if you were going through any female issues whatsoever, you could go and you could put your feet up. We women, of course, pimped and used that to our advantage. And your male boss would never ask a question if you went to him to say, I'm really not feeling well. And he would be like, well, why don't you go to the lounge? So I used to love the ladies' lounge. If you were pregnant, you left work as soon as you began to show. There were no women at work that were pregnant. I remember getting my ears pierced at work one day because I had never gotten my ears pierced. I got my ears pierced at work. And I remember that the person that did it told me it wasn't going to hurt. And anyway, they put a needle in my ear. It does hurt really badly. And then I could go to my boss and be like, I'm not feeling well. And he would go to the ladies' lounge. They never would ask any questions. That's before all the women's rights things came, equal pay and all that stuff. All the men were professional and the women were secretaries. That's the job that women had. We were either clerk typists or secretaries or bookkeepers. We weren't accountants. We did not have any of the professional jobs back then. And that was also during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. And one thing about being a black Jehovah's Witness at that time is that Jehovah's Witnesses never demonstrated, they never participated, but they watched that thing like a hawk. What I remember from my parents, because we were black, is that there was a constant watch. Every word that Martin Luther King said, they were hanging on it by a thread. And the reality is that Jehovah's Witnesses benefit from everything that happens in the U.S., but don't help, don't do anything to contribute to it, but they suck up on it. And one of the things I remember when I was young is the riots of the 60s. The neighborhood we lived in, which I didn't know we lived in the ghetto, but we did. The neighborhood we lived in was approximately a block outside of the area where the riots were. And so there were serious riots in Philadelphia. And I remember, first of all, I wanted to go down and get things because everything was free. People were breaking into all the stores that were 2 blocks from our house, and you could see people like this, carrying TVs and sofas, shoes, and just all this stuff. And I remember wanting to go down. And my dad absolutely insisting, no, we will not steal, we will not participate, we will not. And so from our window, we could see everything that was going on during the riots. And fortunately, in the city, the Philadelphia Police Department had decided that they would not shoot because in other cities, people that were participating in the riots were shot at. Some people were killed. As a result of what happened in those riots, the flavor of what went on in the area that we used to shop at changed drastically because the whole area was torn up. But what happened as a result of the civil rights movement is that opportunities began to open up for minorities that were not open before. And as a result of that, my dad, who I always thought was a rocket scientist and the smartest, handsomest, strongest man in the world, was able to change from the grunt job that he had working at an auto glass place to work for the school board in Philadelphia. My dad had worked, and this is one of the things that I do respect about him. At that time, if you were a black man, you just didn't have that many opportunities to do anything that was not manual. And my dad worked for auto glass replacements. I remember his boss's name. And my dad was essentially the one that was running the auto glass place that he worked at. He wasn't making a lot of money. If he didn't come to work, he didn't get paid. There were no health benefits. And eventually, when this guy's son grew up, I remember that this man, Mr. Green was his name, made his son boss over my dad. And I remember he treated my dad badly, and it always broke my heart. As I got older, it broke my heart. At that time, I was younger, and I didn't know. After graduating high school, in addition to having that job at Girard Bank, I went to Los Angeles with a friend of mine who was also one of Jehovah's Witnesses. She was my age. We were probably 19. We, of course, said we were going to LA because there was a convention, a Jehovah Witness convention at Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. And that was our excuse for going to Los Angeles. Needless to say, she became my partner in crime. We went to Los Angeles. We did go to the assembly for a day or two, but then we went to San Diego. No, we went to San Francisco. And we had a wonderful time in San Francisco, came back to Los Angeles, and then we went to Las Vegas. Of course, when we came back home, we had a wonderful time in Las Vegas. I had never seen casinos or any of that stuff before. We had the most fun. Really, we just walked around and looked at everything because I had never seen anything like that before. I did not tell my parents when they got back. They wanted to know how the convention was. I told them it was wonderful. I also remember as my brother grew up, because all 18-year-old boys, I think, had to sign up for the draft. This was when the draft was going on during the time of Vietnam. And my brother and other young guys that were in my family, they were all conscientious objectors. Some of them ended up having to go to jail as a result of not doing any military service, and neither would they do any auxiliary service. So it's not like you don't have to carry a gun. You can also type. Or there was other things that they were being offered they would not accept. They would not accept. Jehovah's Witnesses do not do anything to support the country that they live in. However, they want to use all the benefits of that country. And it always aggravates me that they want to take advantage of everything that goes on, but they don't want to make any contribution whatsoever. One of the things I remember as I was living with my parents is that if we went to New York City, we always went for the convention. We never went to New York just to go to Broadway or just to hang out in New York. We always went for the convention. And one of the things that I remember as we went to those conventions is at that time, I don't know how it is now, at that time you used to stay at people's houses. They used to ask people to sign up. You could sign up and you would get paid a nominal amount if you had people come and stay at your house. And they would give you breakfast or whatever, and then there was this huge concessions at all the assemblies, and that's where you would eat because you would stay there from morning until night. And so whenever we would go to New York, that's the main reason we went. If we ever went to Atlantic City or to the beach or anything at all as a family, it was always preceded by the study of the Watchtower or some Bible study. We did have fun as a family, but everything was always couched in this religion. And I specifically remember one time going to the beach, and instead of being able to run right out to the water, we had to have a Watchtower study first because we didn't go to Kingdom Hall that day. My brother never did end up going to jail as a result of being a conscientious objector. Why, I don't know. But he ended up not going in the military. But he would have gone to jail rather than participate. I specifically remember one of the families at our Kingdom Hall. I remember actually a lot of the families at our Kingdom Hall, but I remember the Pompey family. The Pompey family, they had loads of kids. They were all older kids, older teenagers, so 18, 19, 16. And I don't know if Miss Pompey, if Sister Pompey, not Miss, Sister Pompey, if she got pregnant as she was an older woman. And she was pregnant when no one expected her to be. She ended up having a little boy. His name was Bori. And they had the most beautiful, curly-haired, he was like a cherub in the face. But aside from that, he was spoiled rotten. He was one of the kids that could run back and forth in the Kingdom Hall. Nobody would ever say anything to him. His parents would never say anything to him. He was doted on. He was spoiled. He was constantly in his mother's lap. His brothers and sisters always were buying stuff for him. The bottom line, though, is that when he turned 5 years old, he got sick. And I don't remember the situation. I don't remember what happened that he got sick. But what I do remember is he needed a blood transfusion. And at that time, Jehovah's Witnesses were adamant about, we do not take blood. And they let that little boy die. Everybody was sad that he had died, but then there's also a feeling of happiness because you've served Jehovah's organization. You've done what you should. You did not, what is it they used to always say, serve man rather than God. You did not go against the dictates of the religion. Therefore, you did not save your child by giving him a blood transfusion. If only they had read all of Leviticus 17. Maybe Bori would still be alive. He certainly is younger than I was now. Jehovah's Witnesses do not give blood. They claim not to accept blood. My father has always been on the committee of people who go and talk to doctors when people need blood. One of the things that I found out from talking to Marlene yesterday is that the stuff that they do take, whatever it is, I'm not a doctor, but the things that they do take are all blood derivatives. They all come from blood. They come as a result of the fact that someone has given blood. I don't even know if a lot of the people that are in the hospital that take that stuff that are Jehovah's Witnesses even know that. I know I didn't until yesterday. Not only that, they used to not take organ transplants. I always wonder, do they think that they like squeeze every drop of blood out of a heart before you take a transplant? One of the things I remember my dad saying to me years ago, this is when AIDS first hit the forefront and when AIDS was in the news, is, isn't it wonderful how Jehovah protects us? Jehovah's Witnesses will never get AIDS because we don't take blood transfusion and we are not homosexuals. And those were the two reasons when AIDS first hit the forefront that people thought that you would get AIDS. And so I didn't know then that they were actually taking transfusions by taking the pieces of blood and the parts of blood that they were taking. The whole time that I was a Jehovah's Witness, out of all it was probably thousands of hours that I spent knocking on people's doors. We would knock on doors when the weather was like this. We would knock on doors when the snow was this high. We would knock on doors when the temperature was below zero. We would come home even though we were black with faces blue and hands blue. We would be so cold, but we never had the option of saying, you know, it's too cold. The weather is too bad. I'm too tired. No excuse would ever do for not being able to knock on people's doors. The only time you were allowed not to do the whole Jehovah Witness routine was if you were deathly ill, which unfortunately for me, I never was. During all the times that we knocked on people's doors, one of the things that I remember is that people would slam the door in your face. They would send their kids to the door to say that their parents weren't home. You could hear them in the background. They'd be like, go tell them we're not here. And then the kids would run to the door and tell you that the parents weren't home. They would tell you that they had their own religion. They would just not come to the door at all. But the one thing that people never did is never once, doing all the time, I said I wouldn't cry. That we knocked on people's doors. Did anybody try to witness to us? Ever? Not once. Who is to know what difference that could have made in my parents' lives when they were dragging us around as kids, or what difference it would have made in my life, my brother's lives, my cousins' lives, my aunts' and uncles' lives, if one Christian had given us a witness. One of the jokes I remember with my dad and I when we went from door to door is I remember we were talking to this man one time, and I don't remember the scripture that Jehovah's Witnesses always use to say that God's name is Jehovah. It might be Psalms 83:18. We had knocked on this man's door, and my dad and I laughed about this for years. This man insisted, he did invite us in, that God's name was hallowed. And he turned to the Lord's Prayer, and it's like, hallowed be thy name. That was our only witness. My dad and I laughed about that for years and years and years. But never once did a strong Christian invite us in. Never once did somebody who knew the Lord invite us in. One thing about Jehovah's Witnesses, too, is that they don't vote. We don't participate in any politics, none whatsoever. But they're very interested in politics. And one of the things, especially now that Barack Obama is running for president, is that people that are black, that are Jehovah's Witnesses, were watching those debates and watching what was going on with that election like a hawk. But of course, they're not going to vote. They might as well vote for all the time and energy that they spend watching and talking about what's going on in this country. One thing about Jehovah's Witnesses also is they don't help anybody outside of their religion. If you are starving to death and a crust of bread would save your life and you are not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, then I wouldn't ask if I was you. They will not. They don't give to charity. They only look after people in their religion. I stayed in that religion until I was in my early 20s. I lived at my parents' house because that's what you did as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. You didn't go out and get your own apartment, at least not then. It may be different now. I was just sick of the religion, and that's the reason I left. It's not because I didn't believe in it. It's not because the doctrine I thought was wrong. I was just sick of it. I was tired of the fact that I couldn't have any kind of social life unless it was with other people that were Jehovah's Witnesses. And a lot of the people that I grew up with that were Jehovah's Witnesses had subsequently gotten married. I wasn't allowed to talk to people outside their religion. I was sick of 5 meetings a week and the constant Bible study. And I had also started to make friends, not really, but I had started to know a few people on my job. And I was exposed to the fact that there was fun to be had. I decided to leave the religion knowing that my parents would be brokenhearted. My intention, however, was to leave the religion. It was never to leave my family. It took me many years to make the decision to leave, but it was actually a year-long process once I made up my mind because I agonized over it over and over and over. I knew that my family would be disappointed and I didn't want them to be disappointed. But I also knew that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. I had actually grown to hate the religion because it was eating away at my young life. And finally, I found an apartment in downtown Philadelphia, right in the heart of everything, right near Rittenhouse Square, which is the real cool place in Philadelphia. I found an apartment, I bought furniture, and I slowly began to sneak the things out of my parents' house in my bedroom that I wanted. Then one Sunday, while my family was at the Kingdom Hall, I pretended to be sick. That's the only reason you could not go. And I left a note that I had prepared in advance because I was too cowardly to tell my parents what was really on my mind. And my girlfriend picked me up, not girlfriend in the biblical sense, just a girl that was a friend, picked me up, and off we went to my new apartment and my new life. Later on that day, my parents called because I had left my phone number. And they were devastated, and so was my little sister, who was still living at home at that time. And they all came over to visit, and we all cried and cried and cried, and they tried to convince me to come back, and I had already made up my mind that I would not go back. Aside from that, I had a year-long lease in my apartment. What I remember is my sister's tears. It broke my heart. My sister was 10 years younger than me, and we had a house that had 4 bedrooms, so there's 3 kids, and then my parents' bedroom. And even though my sister had her own bedroom, she's frequently in my bed. And I would wake up at night to this loud, piercing, because she was a person who used to suck her teeth. And so she was in my bed a lot, and I'd always, get out, get out. But I remember how frequently she slept in my bed. And so as she's like, who am I going to sleep with? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? It was a heartbreak for me. I still decided I wasn't going to go back. And not long after that, then the dreaded committee summoned me. And if any of you don't know, the committee is the group of Jehovah Witness elders that sit in judgment like the Supreme Court, only without the same authority, but they have tremendous authority in the Jehovah Witness organization. They contacted me, and then they asked me to come and talk to them. They grilled me. They wanted to know, why, how come, are you going to come back? You need to know, this is the truth, you're making a big mistake, you know, on and on. The reality is, I said no, I was not going to return. They set up a second meeting. At the second meeting, it was the same thing. I said I wasn't going to return. After the second meeting, they told me I was going to be disfellowshipped. And they asked me to come to the hall for the announcement. I'm sure you all assume that I did not come to the hall. I did. I was so brainwashed that I agreed to go. I mean, when they summoned me, I should have blown them off then, because I knew I wasn't going back, but I was so caught up in the religion that it never crossed my mind not to go. I went to both meetings. When they asked me to come to the Kingdom Hall for the announcement, I agreed. I hadn't been to the hall for a while. Everybody at the hall was happy to see me. My dad was still the congregation overseer. Other people in my family went to that same Kingdom Hall. As a matter of fact, the Kingdom Hall that I was disfellowshipped at, we lived at that Kingdom Hall for approximately 1.5 years. My father was a person who knew how to fix everything. And he was a person who you would come home and the bathroom would be torn out because he's going to move the tub over here. And the Kingdom Hall had 2 apartments over top, and the apartments both needed to be refurbished, and the basement of the Kingdom Hall needed to be worked on. We lived in one of those apartments while my father refurbished that Kingdom Hall. And then we moved back to our house. So anyway, when I went to the hall, everybody was happy to see me. We're so glad, kisses and hugs all around. They welcomed me with open arms, you know, come sit next to me. You know, I didn't sit next to anyone. I chose to sit in the back, and it's like, why are you going to sit in the back? Why are you going to sit in the back? And I'm like, yeah, I just want to sit in the back. And so the meeting went on, and at the end, they made the announcement. I don't even remember what they said, but the bottom line is, people just gasped. They couldn't believe it, and people turned around. And usually in the Kingdom Hall, if somebody is shot in the back, nobody turns around. They always look forward, no matter what is going on. But this one time, there was like, and people turned around. They started to gasp. Some people started to cry. Everybody was shocked, needless to say. And as I left, those same people that had welcomed me with open arms, they stared at me in disbelief. Not one person spoke. Not one. And as a result of my earlier childhood decision to get baptized into that religion stole my entire family. The decision to leave that oppressive religion and the dictates of that organization caused me to use my father, my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, my sister, my brother, my aunts, my uncles. I can't even name, probably around 48 people that I was close to, not including the people that I was not close to that I was also related to. In addition, as people got married, as people grew up, as they had children and their lives changed, I was completely excluded. Never again did I attend a family wedding, a shower, a reunion, a dinner, a picnic, nothing. My parents stopped speaking to me immediately. The first time I laid eyes on my sister's 19-year-old daughter was at my mother's funeral in 2006. It was at my mother's funeral that people came up to me and talked to me that were Jehovah's Witnesses for the first time since I had left, and I had left 30 years ago. They all said the same thing. Please come back, we miss you, we love you, because they feel as though they could talk to you because you're there for a funeral. That 2-day funeral was my only contact with my sister. I had not seen her for 20 years before that, and I haven't seen her since. She continues to refuse to talk to me. We don't communicate on any level. The same kid that was in my bed constantly sucking her teeth will not speak to me at all. And this just opened the door for me to be lonely and depressed. I was sad. I could not shake the loss of my family, even though I knew I was never going to return to that organization. One thing that did happen is that I never stopped believing in it. I could not stop believing in it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I didn't see my parents. I lived in Philadelphia probably another, 10, 12, 15 years after I was disfellowshipped. I finally moved to Virginia. In 1994, my parents came to visit me for 3 days at my house. It's the first time I had seen my mom since I could remember. By then, I had had 3 children. I was married. The next time I saw my mom after that, she had Alzheimer's. The reason that my parents visited is because I had decided that I would write them a tribute. And I got the idea from a Christian radio program. This is toilet paper. They didn't have any tissues in the room. They came to visit as a result of a tribute that I had written. And I got the idea to write a tribute to them from a Christian radio program called Family Life Today. It's a radio broadcast. And I had listened to this, and what they essentially said on this broadcast is that it is possible to honor your parents even though they have made mistakes in your life. And if you have something to say to your parents, especially if you love them, say it while they are alive. And so they had all these different people on there. They had one young lady who had written a tribute to her father, even though he had sexually and physically abused her. And so I, of course, sent away for the tape. I bought the tape, and I decided I would write a tribute to my parents, which took me months and months and months to write. It was very emotional. Essentially, what I said to them, of course, was not thank you for the Jehovah Witness religion, but I thanked them for their love. I thank them for their care. I thank them for never going hungry. I thank them for all the cats and dogs that we had lied and said we were going to take care of, but never did. For all the times we had lied, my mother hated a dog in the bed and a cat in the bed. You always have them under the covers. And be like, do you have that dog in the bed? No. And somebody would say, roof. They always give you away, or a cat would purr really loud. And so I thank them for that. I thank my parents for, we didn't have much money, but I thank them for the time when I really, really wanted a pink mohair skirt and a pink mohair sweater. I was dying for this outfit when I was a teenager. My parents told me we couldn't afford it. I was distraught and I was unhappy. And then one day when I came home, it was on my bed, just laying open. So I thank them for that pink mohair skirt and the pink mohair sweater. And the reality is, I never expected to hear from them. That letter is what prompted the 1994 3-day visit. It's the first time my parents laid eyes on my kids, who at that time, I think were 4 and 18 months. We had a wonderful visit. My heart was broken when they left. They never came to visit again. Several incidents happened in my family during the time since I've been disfellowshipped. One involved a female cousin. She was not forced to get baptized. She left her family and her young daughter, who was like maybe 8. She left her daughter in the apartment. She left all her belongings in the apartment. She left her family. She left everyone to join a cult called Yahweh. While she was in that cult, she had to beg on the streets for money. She had to sell the products that they made. They made soap and other stuff. She had to have 2 children because all the women that were in that cult that were of childbearing age were expected to have children. She cut off all contact with our family by her own choice. One of my other cousins, who's really pretty and very voluptuous, she posed in a girly magazine, topless. Other cousins are addicted to crack. They had children without getting married. They lived from person to person. The bottom line is that every last one of those people, when they decided to come back to our family, was welcomed in. I was not, despite the fact that I was married at the time. I had 3 children. I had a successful job because I did not want to be a part of the religion anymore. So for the next 30 years, I just was wandering like in the wilderness. I worked at various jobs. I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get my degree because I decided that I needed to make money since I was going to continue to work. I got married. I raised 3 kids, and I continued to pine over the loss of my family. Every single time somebody would mention to me, I'm going over to my sister's house, my heart would be broken. Just that slight statement could cause me to fall into tears. And I remember constantly people would say, well, what are you going to do on Thanksgiving? And I always lied. I always said, well, we're going to go to my family's. I never would tell. I remember when my now ex-husband proposed, I wanted to get married in the park. He insisted that we get married at his church. I didn't want to have any kind of wedding, reception. I didn't want to have anything because there was no one to invite. My children, they don't know my family. When my mother died, my children's response to me was, we're sorry your mother died. The exact same response I got from people who didn't know me or my mother. I didn't take them to my mother's funeral. One good thing is that the Jehovah Witness curse stops with me. My kids are all Christians. They were raised as Christians. There are no cult teachings that they have to unlearn, and I am thankful for that. Now for the good part. I was worried about being free of the Jehovah Witness religion. I always believed in it, even though I wasn't participating in it. I began to pray for God to help me. That in and of itself is a huge change because once you leave Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't pray to God for anything personal, and neither will you set foot in a church because you know that that's a demonic place. And so it's very difficult for me to even feel worthy enough to say anything to God. Aside from that, I hated God for leaving me lonely, and I hated him for being so unforgiving. And I hated him for taking my family away. So eventually, I began to pray and to cry out to God. And that in and of itself is a long process. And I started to visit churches. I never could go back because any church that had a flag in the corner, I could never go back to. Because why would they have a flag in the corner when, we're to be separate from the world and we're not participating, we don't salute the flag, the whole thing. So there was always a reason not to go back to a church. A lot of my life I spent in a confused state. I believed in a religion that I hated. And the more I searched, the more confused I became. And then I found a women's Bible study at a local church. And that Bible study was a lifesaver for me. Not so much because I learned as much as I realized that people that were Christians do have a loving heart and spirit. Because when you were born and raised a Jehovah's Witness, you think the only people that have a loving heart and spirit are Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the things that came out of that Bible study was Ephesians 2:8-9. Thank you. I can't figure out how to open it. was Ephesians 2:8 and 9. That scripture blew my mind. And just take the whole thing. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. If this is true, then how can Jehovah's Witnesses be the true religion? They require constant works. And if you work for 10,000 years and then you stop for 2 seconds, you lose your salvation. So that scripture just really hit me hard. During all the times we knocked doors, nobody ever showed us that scripture, ever. And then there's Matthew 11:30. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. The Jehovah's Witness burden is huge. You're like Kunta Kinte carrying that burden. It is a nightmare to carry. I began to wonder, how could that religion be true if these two scriptures were true? And I continued to pray for direction. And during that time was ticking by. My children were lonely for family. And there was nothing I could do. And it's a heartbreaker. My daughter was like, if I only had one aunt. And I remembered when I was growing up, grandparents are the one who, unlike parents, let you dump all the cereal out to get the prize. Parents are like, dump cereal out, you're in big trouble. So my heart is always broken because my children never had the kind of acceptance that I had growing up. Although I was in a false religion, they never had grandparents who said, eat as much ice cream as you want. They never had an aunt who had Charlie chips I don't know if anybody here knows Charlie chips, but Charlie chips used to come in cans. They used to deliver to your house. I can eat a can of chips and 1 can of pretzels. I used to go to my aunt's house. They never had any kids. They had ice cream by the gallon. So my kids never have got the opportunity to experience that. And whenever I would go back to Philadelphia to see friends at Christmas or whatever and call my parents to see if they could just see my kids, the answer was always, we're too busy. One of the answers to my prayer, because my heart is always broken from my children not having any family other than me, is that my brother, who is one of Jehovah's Witnesses who lived in Chicago, I happened to call him to ask him if he would consider coming to Virginia to paint my house. My house needed to be painted. And he's a house painter and a person who can fix all. My father taught us all how to fix stuff. I am like a man in the house. I can do a lot of work in the house. When we were young, my father had me on the roof. We were doing roofing. I laid bricks. I've done a lot of work. So my brother knows how to do a lot of stuff, and I had asked him if he would come to paint our house. I expected him to come for maybe a week or two. I had not laid eyes on my brother for many, many years before that, but I knew where he was. He agreed that he would come. This blessed me so. When he came, I could not stop crying. I had not seen him in so long. The bottom line is, business in Chicago took a turn and God answered my prayer. He stayed with us for 2 years. He was not able to go back to Chicago. As a matter of fact, he sublet his apartment to one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he had given him the rent, half the rent for the month of May. And this guy was supposed to pay the other half for May, and then he was supposed to pay it for June, at which time my brother would return to Chicago. Well, my brother ended up staying in July, and when he called, one of his friends that works at the real estate company said that this guy did not pay the rent for May, he did not pay the rent for June, he did not pay the rent for July, and as a result, they had taken over all my brother's possessions, and my brother is an anal neat freak with 6 toolboxes. They took everything that belonged to him from the apartment. So he lost everything that he had in Chicago, and the business in Chicago had taken a turn for the down anyway. I'm over my time. I'm going to try to make it quick. The bottom line is he had no reason to return to Chicago, which was for me a blessing because he ended up staying with us. And for the first time ever, my kids had somebody to go to their soccer games and somebody to drive them places other than me, somebody to go to the concerts at school. My kids during that time, and I have two that are 16 now, one that's 20, they had more friends over to our house during that time than ever before. As a matter of fact, I told my daughter, I was like, if you say the word uncle one more time, I'm going to strangle you. Because they had never had a relative before, ever. I want to read a little piece of a letter my daughter wrote to my brother when he was about to leave. I'm going to miss you. You taught me so much stuff. You fixed up our basement. My brother redid my basement. My basement is completely finished. It is beautiful down there. It was unfinished before he came. I haven't seen my mother so happy in a long time, and I appreciate your staying with us, even though we aren't in Jehovah's Witnesses. You're the greatest uncle ever. Thanks for spending time with me and getting to know me. I have to admit that when you came, I thought you were an old grumpy man who happened to be my uncle and was going to make my life miserable, but I was wrong. You have made the time living with you amazing. I've never had an uncle before, and you've been the greatest one I think I will ever have or know. I want to thank you for coming to my games. I love you so much, and I'm going to miss you a lot. I thank Jehovah for you. You've become a blessing to me and a great buddy. You're my partner in crime. And he was her partner in crime. They used to watch wrestling and other stuff that I hated. He told my son some things that I didn't know about guys, like how they sit. My son, because he lived with me and is 16 years old, was sitting on top of his knees. I never noticed it before. My brother was like, guys don't sit like that. So it was such a help for my two sons and for my daughter to have a relative, somebody that they knew loved him. And it took time for that to happen. Probably took 6 or 7 months before he was able to say to them, oh no, you're going to go back and clean that bathroom. Somebody other than me, it was a blessing in their lives. And finally, the greatest blessing of all is that I came here last year and I met Bruce Carter. I've never cried so much in all my life. And I got Bruce Carter's phone number, and I met Todd and Betty Ellis. And not struggling with Jehovah Witness religion, it keeps you a prisoner. I ended up talking to Bruce once the convention was over and telling him about my struggles, and I had told Todd and Betty while they were here too, and Bruce said, you need to talk to Todd. As a result, God led me to Todd Ellis, and he saved my life. He's been such a huge blessing to me beyond anything I could tell. I could not get finished with that religion. I couldn't get over Christmas, the torture stake, blood transfusion. How can people interchangeably use the name of Jesus and God? No one at church can explain that because they don't have that as a foundation. Todd started a Bible study with me in November, and every Wednesday at 9:30, we would meet on the phone. Finally, I was able to know who Jesus is. I was able to understand it. He just freed my mind so that I was able to enjoy myself. I wasn't constantly depressed. I went to see my girlfriend in Florida, who I haven't seen for many, many years. I'm happy. I'm open to life's possibilities. I am finally able to begin to forgive my family for their choices, and I can pray for their release. And this is a huge step because this forgiveness really frees me from the prison that I had built for myself. Jehovah's Witnesses are lost. They need help from a personal Bible study. There is loads of information to read, but if you cannot Read it and understand it. As Scott Peterson said yesterday, it's never 2 + 2 = 4. It's always 2 + 2 = 3. It's like laying a piece of written material in front of a blind person. The information is there, but can they get it? It is difficult. Without personal Bible study, I think I would continue in bondage for goodness knows how long. People that leave Jehovah's Witnesses are lost. They don't know where to go. I want to say this last thing. I heard a comment yesterday about not inviting them into your house, but if you do not, how will you ever reach? If you don't take time to talk to them about your religion in a non-belligerent, understanding, and loving way, how will you ever reach? Amen. For my entire family who doesn't speak to me and who continue in that religion and now have children and grandchildren that continue in that religion, how will they ever be reached? We as Christians have an obligation not only to love these people from afar and poke fun at their religion and laugh at their religion and point out all the things that they're doing that's wrong, but we have an obligation to bring them to Christ. That will never happen if you don't take time to have a personal Bible study. And it has to be done in a non-belligerent way. And when I look back to all the literature I have the Watchtower Illusion. I have 3 or 4 tapes from McGregor Ministries. I have information stacked this high, which I have read over and over and over. It always ends up being 2 + 2 = 3. I just would encourage those of you who are capable of reaching one of Jehovah's Witnesses, just one, on a one-on-one basis, that you take the time to do that. When they come to your door, I have my own religion will never help free them. Amen. I'm just thankful for Todd and the Bible study and his patience, because I would not understand. He would read it. I would still refuse to understand it, and he was patient and helped me to know who Jesus is, and I just thank you, Todd. And I just want to thank everybody here for listening, because now I know who Jesus is, and it is blessing.